What up, perps? King Copious back in effect. Purple State Party, you know what we're doing here? Repping America, the center, and common sense. So we're going to focus on some weird stuff this week. I just find what I find and I bring it to you. And I hope bit by bit we can get people to a new way of thinking. So let's kick it off. So, one of my hopes for the Trump administration was that they would take an easy win, continue the work that the Biden administration had done on some good ideas. And it looks like maybe they're going to. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche said that he's ordering an executive order to immediately reschedule FDA-approved marijuana and state-licensed marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, and ordered an expedited hearing to fully reschedule the drug. See, the problem is because of campaigns by people like William Hurst, the movie Reefer Madness, people got the wrong idea about weed. They really did. They have it scheduled with heroin, ecstasy, and LSD. It very strictly regulated, considered very dangerous. And the truth of the matter is, anybody who's ever smoked weed knows it's not any of those things. When you think about this Schedule 1 drugs, heroin, ecstasy, and LSD, heroin's very addictive. Opioids are very addictive. The body can create pain, so it makes it very hard to quit because you always feel like you need it. But the other ones, I don't know how addictive they really are. The real Schedule 1 drug in America is alcohol. That is, it's frankly dangerous to quit drinking. Imagine that. But hopefully this goes through. Schedule 3 is defined as moderate to low potential for physical and psychological dependency. I think there's a lot of medical use for weed. I know for myself, I seem to recover from injuries. I do a lot of walking. I do a lot of warehouses where you're constantly putting your body into weird positions to get around things. And, I get knee pain, stuff like that, and it goes away. It just simply goes away. My body relaxes. It's able to heal. But anyhow, you got Richard Nixon to thank for this because he fell for all the hype and he put it on the Schedule 1 drug. So we're finally getting somewhere, I really don't think that, I think the focus should really be on keeping kids off of it because just like any drug, really, it really messes with the developing brain. There are some studies that talk about the long-term effects of marijuana on male fertility. Again, anecdotally, I had a kid when I was 37, so I don't know about that. I can't say that I would worry about long-term fertility, especially since, the clock on women clocks out sometime in their mid-40s. I don't know we need to worry about that. What we need to worry about is the fact that people can relax on weed. It doesn't inflame issues like something like an alcohol does. It doesn't lead you to the streets like these other drugs can do. Alcohol, heroin, fentanyl, things like that. I think it's high time we just allow it to be marketed, and keep it out of the hands of kids. Yeah, that's about it. One of the things that I see that's very troubling to me is the fact that everything seems to be a subscription-based model nowadays. And the people who are running these subscriptions often wield their power to direct their own views on public opinion. We saw that a lot when people were speaking out against elections, vaccines, things like that. Granted, there needs to be some sort of control, but what I find really gross is that they apply it to silence political opposition, but they don't really do much when it comes to protecting people. They protect people from hurtful words, and they'll call the cops on the hurtful words. But a lot of times, you just see open drug dealing and pimping and stuff like that on these social media accounts. But the one that's getting to me right now it comes from this story. A YouTuber buys a $2,000 wrecked Tesla and turns it into a go-kart. Then Tesla kills the fun. So this guy, Remy Evans, he bought basically just a 2020 Tesla Model 3. It had no body panels, no windshield, no seatbelts, and no sensors. And it had been just sitting in a driveway. Something, I guess one of the popular things to do is to take a Tesla, the overall motors and all that stuff, and put them into more classic cars. But I guess it didn't work out, so this guy sold it. And so this guy, Remy, he bought it, turned it into a go-kart. He used ratchet straps as seatbelts, and it was had been deactivated. The previous owner had disabled the Model 3's safety sensor stack, which is the software layer that normally prevents drifting, donuts, and anything Tesla considers reckless. Right. And again, as he's driving this thing around, he's getting 78 error codes. And it drove fine until he tried to fast charge it. And he had to do some workarounds to do that. The software started picking up on all the missing stuff. They call it over-the-air systems, which means the car is constantly being monitored by Tesla's computers. And to do it on fast charging, there's a software flag that a dealer usually enables. But this guy had been avoiding the software updates, and, he knew that if the Tesla sensed that all of these parts were missing, maybe it wouldn't start working. So he downloaded the Tesla app so he could check it to start figuring out what he could fix and what he couldn't fix. And it started locking him out. It's insane. Like they said in the article here, a gas-powered project car can sit half-built in a garage for a decade and then still fire up when you put a battery in it. A Tesla will die quietly in its sleep if the software decides it should. They've taken it another step. Some of the high-end Teslas come with a clause that you can't resell the car for a year or you face a $50,000 fine. I've heard of other somewhat high-end cars locking out the maximum horsepower unless you pay for a subscription. And our government is now doing the same thing. We're going to get a little more into that later, where the government is just doing whatever they want, and they're just adding fees and costs. They're blowing money. They're getting ripped off in fraud, and then they just expect us to pay for it. And then the saddest part about it is people then vote for these same people. See, a lot of times, the argument, or when you talk about the country, is made around, well, the Republicans do this, the Democrats do that. Well, here in California, we have been under Democratic rule for a long-ass time now, decades. And so the things that we're seeing come from them. And it comes mostly from these so-called Democratic Socialists of America, these far lefties. And I wanted to bring you a story of a far lefty right here. This took place over in Dorset, England. Okay, it's on the southern coast, right there on the English Channel. An activist frees a lobster from a restaurant to keep it from being eaten, but discovers later the creature was a pet. Yeah, this chick, Emma Smart, not very smart, ran into a restaurant, grabbed a lobster out of a tank, and threw it into the bay. Well, as the owner said, this was a pet. They had names. There were two of them in there, Reggie and Ronnie. And they were in there for about 2.5 years, and they were, just kind of there as educational, sort of like ambassadors or whatever, but they were never going to be eaten. Well, when this radical animal activist threw it into the cold bay, the lobster died because, well, the bay's cold and the tank was warm. Lobsters don't really like sudden change in temperature, which is why, when you throw them into a boiling pot of water, they die instantly. Of course, that's been outlawed now. They seem to think it's more humane to jab a knife through its brainstem. I don't get it. It's an animal. I don't, that's going to be eaten either way. Either way, it's ending up dead. But the other poor lobster died. The one that was left in the tank died. So she took out two of them. But it's really indicative of how the left is. They get all excited about their cause, and they forget to look at the effect. Everybody was talking about open borders in Europe and then open borders under the Biden administration, and that's been a debacle across the world. It has literally just been a debacle. You have allowed the worst of the worst. You have allowed people who only come here for bad intentions to come across the border. Of course, you could point out a lot of people came here for work, blah, 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 blah. Yes, but when something like 14 million people come in, 10%, if 10% were bad, that's 1.4 million. And that's what we're seeing in England, and that's what we saw in France, and we're seeing it around the world, where Western society decided that the progressive thing to do was just to throw open the borders and take in all the refugees and don't even bother vetting them. And now we've got this mess to clean up. And their policies across the board lead to this kind of stuff. I've talked about it before. If you just want to hand out money left and right, throw money at these problems, you're not looking at where it's being spent. We talk about the mentally ill that crowd our streets now. And people want to blame Reagan when he was governor of California. But where is any common sense being applied? If the problem is that Reagan closed all the state facilities, why haven't the Democrats opened them up? See, it's not good enough to just figure out who to blame and say, oh, it's their fault. You need to fix the problem. And while I'm on the subject, I just want to say, hopefully, our next presidential election cycle, we start to see people who are competent, not just names. Because that's what we've seen for 3 straight elections now. We've seen popular names pop up, and they get elected, and they don't do a great job. They really don't. I don't see Trump fixing any of the problems he was going to fix. I applaud him for some of the stuff he's done, like the finally getting weed taken down to a Schedule 3. It's the first step. But, oh my God, these people just wait too long to react. I'm rambling, so let's move on. So one of the things that I've been railing against is the fact that we have allowed these e-bikes and these e-scooters to just proliferate all over the place. Kids doing whatever they want on them, criminals using them, kids just, running into people, accidents, blah, 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 blah. And it's finally starting to come to a head. In Orange County, the school district is voting to ban e-bikes at elementary and middle schools starting next year. That's kindergarten through 8th grade will not be permitted to bring e-bikes and other motorized vehicles on campus. One of the reasons why I think it's stupid is when kids walk to school or skateboard to school or bike to school, at least they're getting some exercise. What I'm seeing everywhere I go now is these kids are acting irresponsibly. You see electric bikes, 2-3 kids on them. It's not safe. And I hate to be the one because I myself am a bit of a daredevil. But one of the philosophies I always had was that if you're going to be crazy, be smart. And these are not smart. And allowing these kids to just be unregulated on these things is just kind of stupid. And so now they will require high school students who do bring e-bikes to complete safety training and follow district requirements. California is finally stepping up. They need these things to be registered with the state and display license plates. Now the cynic in me says they're just doing this to raise money. But, as this assemblywoman, a Democrat from Arita, Rebecca Cahan, says, the dramatic rise in e-bike injuries across California demands immediate attention. This common sense legislation will improve accountability and help law enforcement protect our kids and all users of our roads and pathways. That's just it. When kids can just operate at will and nobody can trace it because there's no license plate, I think that makes sense. From 2018 to 2023, they've had an 18-fold increase in injuries. That's something that needs to be looked at. They are dangerous. They are coming in somewhat unregulated. I mean, I've talked about this before, but the problem with buying all of our shit from China is that China will just cheat the system. They will say they comply with certain things, but there's no real checks and balances on that. And what are you going to do? Sue a Chinese company? Good luck with that. So, one of the things I've been hearing about lately, a lot of people ask me about when we start talking about, politics and all that, is this whole thing about 10 individuals with ties to U.S. nuclear, aerospace, and defense research have died or disappeared under suspicious circumstances since 2023. So in 3 years, about 3 people have disappeared, and you could tie them back to them. And, they like to talk about some of these people who actually had high-level security clearance, worked with sensitive material and stuff. But this is just a bullshit conspiracy. It's mostly coming out of the right wing. A lot of people that I talk to say that they don't really believe that there's anything to this, but it's a distraction from the Epstein files. The Epstein files are their own distraction. Every time I talk about the Epstein files, I hope it's the last time. But Epstein was running a group of people who were passing policies and laws and gaining financially off of those laws. I mean, it's really easy. If you know that the government, the U.S. government, is going to sign a large purchase agreement for widgets with Company X, buy stock in Company X. And that's what it was really all about. This isn't to diminish the claims of the victims, because there were victims. But most of the victims were through Epstein or a few of his people. The rest of the cadre of people that were over there on Epstein Island, they were manipulating governments to make money. But when you start looking at these 10 scientists, you realize there's a lot of stuff behind it that just doesn't make sense. One of them was an HR secretary with no clearance. One of them was just a contracted construction worker with no clearance. Another one was retired for years and had no clearance whatsoever. This is one of those things where it's like the Bible code. If you spend enough time going through the Bible with all of the words that are in the Bible, eventually you can start putting pieces together. But when you look at this story, 3 out of the 10 people really didn't have any clearances. Some of them were known to be suicidal and more than likely took their own life in a remote, area where they just weren't found. One of them was killed in a mass shooting at a college. I mean, it's conspiracy theorists are just they're nutty to me. It's one thing to see the movie script you could make out of something. It's another to really believe it. But anyhow, we'll move on to something else that's crazy. For years I've listened to the Armstrong and Getty show, AM 790 here in LA. And they had something really interesting to say. When you try to help the poor, the druggies, and the crazies, okay, you end up helping no one. And that's what's going on the streets of LA and other big cities. That, yes, there are people out there that are struggling to find affordable housing. Cool. But there are also people who are living on the streets by choice because they just want to do drugs. There's people who are living on the streets because they refuse to take their medication and they just have mental issues that make them incompatible with living with people, taking care of themselves, and so we just dump them on the streets. One of those massive dumps is in West Rancho Dominguez, which is basically just a rebranded Compton. But for a half a mile stretch of West Compton Boulevard is occupied by over 200 RVs and fortified structures, with residents reportedly siphoning electricity and water directly from the county infrastructure. The problem with that statement is that it's not reportedly. That's what's happening. They're tapping into power lines. They go in and with bolt cutters, and they just cut the line, they pull down the copper wire that's running up to the light, and then they use the live electricity down below. They use that to power stuff. They have generators. I've seen it. They're creating their own electricity. these create dangerous and horrible conditions where you have frequent fires. What did we talk about last week? 46 fires a day in LA from the homeless, drug overdoses, shootings, stabbings. And nobody does anything. Nobody. They went there. Fox 11 News went there, and they were interviewing somebody, and she was showing her living room and her bedroom, and she said the electricity is pulled directly from a street light. But what do? Nothing. They don't do anything. One guy they interviewed said, I don't have a place to go, so I have to stay here, but I don't like it. Well, is he willing to make the changes to go into housing? What? No? Okay. The reporter asked a woman, has the county offered you help? Yeah, don't want it, she responded. Yeah, because they want to live off the grid. They don't want to pay bills. They don't want to pay taxes. They don't want to work a job. They just want to do drugs and be left alone. And we can do that, but we need to move them away from where everybody else is. Why? This is why I don't understand why people are still voting for these Democrat socialists. All right? Why should we, the citizens, have to put up with this shit while we're doing it right? Look at what LA's about to do. You know what LA wants to do? They want to start charging homeowners whose houses are illuminated by streetlights $200 a year to fix the lights. But they're going to leave the homeless there. Karen Bass, she came out and said, as long as the voters support the streetlight assessment, we'll be able to replace all 200,000 lights across the city. 200,000 lights. To do it right now, it would increase the LA budget from $45 million to $125 million, which they can't do. LA alone is losing $20 million a year in just wire theft. They want you to pay for the damage done by the street urchins, but they're not going to do anything about the street urchins. They'll just keep shuffling them around the block until they come back around to you again. People are committing crimes. Sleeping on the street is a crime. Okay? I don't care what the fucking progressives have to say about it. We should not have to deal with that. People should not have to live in fear of a fucking half-mile stretch of just random people who just want to live off the grid and do what they want. This is not cool. And then to fix the problem, we're going to charge every homeowner. Let's look at something on the numbers. You know, properties are considered to receive a special benefit from the lighting if a portion of the road work and sidewalk adjacent to the property is receiving significant illumination from the lighting. This is the Bureau, the LA City Council Bureau, claiming the fee is not a tax, but rather a levy or charge for a special benefit. Oh, so streetlights are now a special benefit. Oh, okay. So most homeowners would pay about $120 to $175. Apartment buildings, you're going to have to fork over up to about $4,700 a year. And commercial properties will need to fork over almost $8,200 a year. For what? They didn't take the copper. They didn't dismantle the street light. They're not running power off of fire hydrants or water off of fire hydrants. They are trying to do business in a state that makes it increasingly difficult to do business. One person on the city council voted against this, Monica Rodriguez. She said it's unreasonable to ask them to shoulder yet another cost. You can't ask people, she said, to pay more when you haven't done the work to rein in the expenses that you've already passed on to them. Before moving forward with any fee increase, the city should present a clear, up-to-date plan for maintaining and protecting this infrastructure. No, because guess what? Democrat socialists don't want a plan other than to tear down the past. We're going to tear down the past and replace it with something better. Well, what's that something better? We have no idea. They're sending they are planning on sending these special benefit bills to residents in the Pacific Palisades who don't even have a house right now. But your property gets special benefits. Jessica Rodriguez, the president of the Pacific Palisades, said this is yet another sign the city of Los Angeles is failing its residents. Instead of addressing the root causes of these failures, The city continues to rely on short-term fixes and Band-Aid solutions. If you want to move these people to the other side of the mountains or up a little more north, a lot of that open land we have up there, build some facilities for them to take care of them, wraparound services, provide them places where they can, power their RVs or live in their tents. That's fine. You want to set up some solar panels to generate that electricity so it's off the grid? Cool. But what they're doing right now is they're just allowing these people to rip apart the infrastructure. In LA City, over 100 fire hydrants were stolen. And they just sell it. They sell it to scrap markets, so we know where it's going. Some of them have stole copper wire from Little League fields. So these kids who are just trying to play baseball can't play at night because all of the lights have been destroyed. Like I said, they just chop the wire and they leave the live wires there. And what's Bass's solution? Oh, solar-powered street lights. Really? Because they'll climb up the poles and they'll steal those too. They will. That's what they do. They'll steal ladders. They'll put them up on the thing. They'll go up there. They'll steal the solar panels and take all the valuable minerals out of that. That's what they do. These are rats on meth. And they keep voting for it. Yeah. And of course, when you talk to people who own apartment buildings, they said, well, yeah, we'll pass the cost on to the renters. So again, housing goes up a little bit more. One of them, this lady Varga, a guy named Varga, says people who work hard are now being asked to clean up the city's crime mess. A third of LA City Council are Democrat Socialists of America. They don't care about crime. Because what they would like is so much chaos on the streets that people turn to the government and just say, look, do whatever you need to do. Charge us whatever you need to charge us. And then these corrupt individuals can continue to do exactly what they've been doing. Yeah. And they do. And they just make up excuses. I mean, there's a guy right now who, where is it right here? He was sexually molesting his stepdaughter, received 129 years, and he's on the verge of getting out. Because in 2020, Newsom signed a law amending the elderly release program by lowering the eligibility age to 50 with 20 years served. The program was established with eligibility at 65 with 25 years served, which to some degree makes sense depending on what crime you're talking about. That somebody who's 65 is probably a lot less likely to reoffend. But when it comes to these sexual predators, there is no age too old enough. And Gavin Newsom, of course, says, oh, well, I can't do anything. All I could do is recommend to the board. But when voters said we would like to keep the death penalty, he put a moratorium on that. When Newsom wants to do something, he goes around the law. We've seen it with a lot of the anti-gun stuff he's done here in California, where he knows that it's in flagrant violation of the Second Amendment, but he does it. But when it's something as serious as keeping child rapists in jail, oh no, my hands are tied. I have to follow protocol. Look, if we let the far left, the progressives, continue down this road, we are not going to have much of a state, let alone a country, left. Now, I know the Republicans, they have their flaws too. Okay? I mean, quite frankly, I'm not exactly impressed with the Trump administration. There are things he's done that have impressed me, but some of the people involved, I don't know, man. I don't know. Am I really supposed to, come on my show here and defend Kash Patel? But I can't really rip him apart because the last guy, who the fuck that was, we have been allowing these people to just run a shit show for far too long, and hopefully that changes. Hopefully that changes in California. Look, I don't care if you have a DR and R next to your name. If you're going to be the next governor of California or the next mayor of Los Angeles, can you please not pretend to be something like Spanberger did in Virginia? Don't don't tell me you're middle of the road. And then as soon as you get into office, you just more of this far left progressive shit. Because while in the past, a lot of these progressive ideas were necessary and thank God they passed, they've gone off the rails now. And if you're a Republican that's running for governor or mayor, please do your job. I mean, I'll vote for Spencer Pratt, okay? Remember that guy? Oh, that guy's like a total reality show whore and villain. But if he's actually going to try to do something here in LA, then, I commend that. But we need people to step up and undo the regulations and the schemes that have been dragging California down for a while. We want to get more people into housing, then you got to lower the cost of housing. Why is lumber so expensive in California? We've got nothing but trees. And once every so often, all those trees burn to the ground and take homes and lives with them. But we won't allow the forestry, the forestation, we won't allow the timber industry to get going here in California. We need gas. We have oil under our own soil that we're pumping out up north in Santa Barbara. We're pumping it out, but not at the rate that we need. We need to undo these regulations, and we need to stop the bullet train. We need to stop things like the bullet train, like trying to bill LA citizens for the damage to the streetlights. You know who's damaging the streetlights. You know what you have to do. Plain as day. Just fucking do it. That's all I ask. That's all I'm asking out of politicians, is do the job that you were elected to do. Stop with your fucking agendas and do the job that needs to be done. If we need more prisons, build more prisons. Because we need more prisons. We don't need a bullet train. We don't need all of these weird little commissions and boards to try to make everybody happy and make everybody equal and all of that. Everybody has an equal opportunity to succeed in America and here in California. Stop spending money on that shit. Start spending money on what needs to be done. We need to clean up our streets. We cannot have people going around and just stealing infrastructure. Period. It's not that difficult. It's a no-brainer. But their solution? Let the vandals do whatever they want, and we'll charge the people who are busting their asses, grinding every day to pay their bills. Bullshit. I'm Kid Copious. I'm Purple State Party, and so are you. Love one another. Keep on grinding. And yeah, when you got to release some of that, dance it out.